What's up? It's Neil from Aviator. Got Matt with me as well. We're going to go over the new Moster EFI and our trip to Italy to learn about the Moster EFI, the unveiling, all that fun stuff. So let's get into it.
So, Neil, we took a trip out to Italy. We got to see some exciting new technology from Vittorazi. My personal opinion is that this is going to be a pretty game-changing thing for paramotoring in general. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. They've made it completely obvious that this is the direction that they are going, and this is the direction that paramotor is going. This is going to take paramotor to the next level for sure. This is going to make it easier for everybody that's getting into paramotors to not necessarily always have to be their own mechanic. Like, a lot of things are going to be taken care of for themselves. So like going to a new place and not having to tune your carburetor anymore, having onboard diagnostics, it's really a game changer.
Yeah, just the simple fact that you can, start off on the ground with your motor tuned a certain way, and if you have a plan to like fly up to 10,000 feet and do some shenanigans up there and come back down, your motor's just going to automatically adjust itself no matter what altitude you're at, and I think that's just super cool.
Yeah, definitely. Your engine's going to be completely optimized all the time, no matter what, which is a huge, huge game changer for paramotor.
One of the first things that came out about, one of the first things that kind of sneaked out about this was the price tag, right? It's a pretty steep price tag. It's actually it's the most expensive Vittorazi Moster engine, even more expensive than the factory R. Right. So the price that we know about right now, of course, things for the U.S. retail market are not final yet. But the price tag right now is 5,500 euros.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that price tag?
Well, when you and I were talking on the way to the airport and you told me that price tag, I was kind of like, oof, wow. But, I had only seen the prototype pictures of kind of what they were working on and everything. So I kind of had this idea in my head of what it was going to be. So once we got in the conference room and actually saw the production version of it, it was like, oh wow, okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah, that really stood out to me as well. Was EFI has been talked about in paramotoring probably for a decade now. People have been talking about some sort of kit, some sort of aftermarket thing that they can put on a paramotor that will bring EFI to paramotoring. And even Aviator had our kind of foray into that field of like trying to put EFI in a paramotor. Yeah. But what Vittorazi's done here is completely different than anything else has been done so far. This is a fully integrated EFI system. We'll talk about some of those fully integrated features like the safe start. Yeah. There's lots of sensors that are built into the unit, like the cylinder head temperature gauge and the exhaust temperature gauge, and all of those are feeding data into this new EFI unit, and all of that data is going into making your flight just more enjoyable, more natural, right? You don't have to think about your engine or your engine outs or where your gas level is or anything like that. You can just sit back and enjoy your flight.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's, with them developing it in-house, that's what was most surprising to me, and like we just said, that's when the price tag kind of made sense to me, was how much further along than I thought that they were. And it's obvious that they're going full commit. They've hired engineers to do this. They've added on to their building to do this. Like, this is
they spent a lot of money and they put a lot of resources into this, and you can absolutely tell. So I think what we should do now is pull the cover off and take a look at the EFI.
Yeah, show it off. So immediately you can tell this throttle body here, that's probably the most glaring change from the regular Moster. You no longer have a chainsaw carburetor on here. This is made in-house specifically to the Vittorazi. Instead of having a butterfly that closes and opens, you got this big obstruction in the middle of the throttle body. It's kind of a barrel that has a hole in it that turns, and when you're full throttle, the barrel of the throttle body is completely unobstructed.
So if you've ever looked at like plumbing fittings and things like that, they have a thing called a ball valve, right? And the way it is like there's a big, like a butterfly in the top, and it's attached to a ball in the middle, and that ball has a hole in it. And when it's like this, it's closed, and when you turn that butterfly, it opens that ball valve, and that's what lets the fuel, the air mixture go into the engine, right?
Yeah,
so instead of, when Neil's talking about this, there's that butterfly on that rod inside your carburetor, and that's that obstruction in the center of the carburetor. Well, that's no longer there with that ball valve.
It's also going to be E-start only. The ECU and the pump housing and all that are where the pull start normally is. You're going to get a lot more reliability out of this E-start because because it starts so well, you hit the button and it cranks right up and it starts. There's not sitting there hitting the button over and over, trying to get things going. Those brushes are getting hot and starting to melt. All that's gone. You hit the button, it cranks up, and you're good.
So there's a little bit of a change with the e-start procedure. What most people are used to with e-start, especially on a Vittorazi engine, is have two separate buttons on your throttle. One to kill the motor, one to start the motor. Usually there's a green button on here that starts the motor. With this new EFI system and the way that they put this together, the starting is basically a double click and hold. So it's like, and then you hold it and then the motor starts. Same button actually used for kill switch as well. So you just hold that button and it kills the motor as well. One of the coolest and one of the safe things that they've done with this engine is a safety feature they've added called Safe Start. If you've ever flown a Scout motor or something with a safe start that's been installed aftermarket, you kind of know what that is. It's a system that's going to prevent you from ground starting your motor and having throttle at the same time. So if you start that engine up and you have a little bit of throttle pressed, that motor can take off, right? And there's a lot of accidents that are caused in paramotoring because of this. And what we train people here at Aviator do is just never ground start your engine. Always on your back or on a rack or some way secured, right? Because you never want that engine to take off. People get really hurt that way. So this Safe Start is fully integrated into the system, completely integrated in two different ways. One, it's going to cut off spark to the spark plug, and two, it's going to cut off fuel to the fuel system. I've never heard of a Safe Start system that actually cuts off fuel to the fuel system.
Yeah,
so this is a new innovation for Vittorazi.
Right, and the downside of having one of those other Safe Start systems on a carburetor is if you live with a carb, you know they can be a bit finicky, so you do have to crack the throttle a little bit when you're trying to start it. Most people that have a Safe Start system on their paramotor end up disabling it because it just doesn't work with a carburetor very well. Where with the EFI, it works flawlessly. This is the first time that system has actually been able to function correctly.
So this computer in here, and we'll get some closer up pictures later, but this computer in here knows exactly where this throttle position is at all times. And if you try and start this motor and there's any throttle pulled whatsoever, it's going to kill it within the first 4 seconds. Now there is a little bit, I'd like to, talk with Vittorazi and maybe figure out a slightly better way to do this, because this 4-second delay actually still happens while you're in the air. So if you have a motor out and you need to restart your engine while you're flying, still restart it, still a simple process, just a double click, but you have to wait 4 seconds to pull any throttle whatsoever. Your motor's going to die immediately. So again, that's something we'll maybe not make it completely to the final version. Maybe we'll adjust that down from 4 seconds to 2 seconds, or we'll come back with what the real answer is there. But that fully integrated Safe Start, I think, is going to be a really good safety feature for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a lot of new interesting features to learn with this new motor. When I switched to EFI 2-stroke on my bike, I was just blown away with how well it runs all the time, no matter what. And that's really what you get with this as well. It's just such a huge step up from a carburetor. You don't have to screw around jetting or tuning and all this other stuff. It just does it all for you, and it runs perfect all the time. So it's really gonna be a game changer.
Remember when you landed for the first time and I talked to you about it, and I was like, well, what do you think? What's your first impressions of the motor? And what stands out to me was you said, meh. It didn't blow my mind. But I think that's actually the mind-blowing thing, is that it's not going to blow your mind. It's just going to run. It's going to be reliable. It's going to adjust itself to the conditions that you're in, and it's going to fly great no matter where you are. And I think that's the mind-blowing thing. It's not going to blow your mind with performance, although it does have a little bit more performance than a regular Moster. It's not going to blow your mind with like fuel consumption, although it does have some pretty impressive fuel consumption numbers we'll talk about in a minute. What's going to blow your mind is the ability to throw this motor on your back and know it's going to run every single time.
Yeah. It was same thing. It didn't knock my socks off the first flight, but when that second and third flight that I took on it, that's when it really started to make sense and really started to impress me. Like especially that 5,500, 6,500 RPM range, where you're cruising RPM range, where you're typically normally flying at. I could hear it on my back, and it just ran so perfectly the whole time. Barely burning any fuel, like 2.5 liters an hour or something like that, but it was just perfect that whole time. That's when it really started to hit me, like how much of a game changer this engine really is.
Yeah, it really, looking back at the videos of even just putting the motor on your back and just doing a lean back with it or something like that, right? You can just hear the difference of how this motor runs. It just purrs.
it runs so good all the time. That's really the most impressive part of it, is how well it runs.
So let's transition and talk about the next most impressive part, which I think is where you're going to get a lot of customers of this engine, is the fuel consumption. And let's compare and contrast that, because I think one of the downsides is this thing does way more, right? There's a lot of extra pieces in here, there's moving parts, there's that EFI computer, there's some extra weight, and right now it's about 8 extra pounds. However, I think the cool trade-off for that is the fuel consumption on this is almost double.
Yeah, I know there's a fuel consumption curve that I can probably get it somewhere, but the main thing is you're using up about 2.5 liters an hour when you're at cruise RPM, and that 5,500 to 6,500 RPM range that you're typically flying at, as you know, with that old style chainsaw style carburetor, you're bouncing up all over the place. It just doesn't run perfectly smooth. The motor's kind of doing this thing on your back. That's where you're really gaining that fuel consumption, is when you're flying in that range. And they optimize the map for that range because that's typically where you're flying at. So
that's your cruising.
Yeah, they spend a ton of time on getting that spot in the RPM range perfect. So that's where you're picking up that additional efficiency out of it. It was just being optimized in that range right there.
So my fuel consumption numbers on mine, and I fly a Moster Factory R with a 26 meter Spider 3. My fuel consumption numbers are generally between 5.7 liters per hour and about 6.3 liters per hour, depending on what I'm doing, right? If I'm getting a little crazy, it's a little higher, and if I'm just having a nice level flight, it's a little bit lower, but it's in that range most of the time. And I only know that because I had to do the math, right? You fill up the tank with the with X number of liters, and you watch how it goes down. Now the cool thing about this is it's going to tell you exactly what your fuel consumption is at all times, right? And we've got a couple videos of watching that dashboard in flight, and the numbers were super impressive, right? Like 2.6 liters per hour, or some like 2.6 to like 3.2 was kind of in that range for me.
And the display unit will show you your average fuel consumption as well as your instantaneous fuel consumption. So you'll see when you're on full throttle how much you're burning at full throttle, and vice versa. So you have that option as well. And being that this is EFI with an actual pump on it and everything, there's been a few attempts at having a fuel consumption meter on a paramotor, but being, again, chainsaw carburetor with vacuum diaphragms and all that, it's not very accurate at all, and that's why you don't really see a whole lot of those. But being that this is EFI, you've got a feed system, return system.
Yeah. The best I've seen,
it knows exactly what it's burning.
There's an aftermarket thing that's got like little sensors that you can glue to the side of the tank, and it looks at the levels of the fuel tank. But you really lose accuracy once you get below that lowest, like 25%, right? This is going to tell you down to the minute what your remaining flight time is at current throttle position, right? So if it says 25 minutes remaining and you go a little nuts, then maybe you have a little bit less than that. But it's going to be a really good indicator of your fuel burn and your fuel consumption, which I think is another huge safety feature as well.
For sure. And one interesting thing that they did, being that they were doing this in-house, they were able to test everything, is instead of using an oxygen sensor, being this is a two-stroke, you're still using premix, so you're burning your oil through the combustion chamber. Mm-hmm. They went with an EGT sensor, and it's a specific EGT sensor that's very sensitive. You can watch it on the display. You hit the gas, and the temperature goes up immediately, and let off the gas, it goes down immediately. It's very, very precise. So instead of using that oxygen sensor that's going to gum up all the time with that unburnt oil and everything, got an EGT sensor that's always going to be there. It's not going to require any maintenance like that. So that was something very different. Also, the CHT, which is your cylinder head temperature, instead of having that under the spark plug like your typical aftermarket kits will do, they added a drilled and tapped hole to the head, so it attaches just about an inch away from the spark plug, and that'll give you a bit more sensitivity and a bit of more consistent temperature rather than that spark plug being like a heat soak.
It's more accurate reading, right? 'Cause you're picking up heat from the spark itself.
From the actual, you're getting temperature directly from the cylinder head and not having temperature affected from the spark plug and everything.
Right.
Because that's going to act as a heat soak, being that it's steel spark plug.
So one other thing I want to talk about when you're transitioning. So a diaphragm carb has low screw, high screw, and you can always feel that transition when you go from low screw to high screw, and that's what's that, about 6,300 RPM or something like that.
It's
about that range when you can almost anticipate it. And actually, I was talking to Trevor Steele, who went out to Italy with us and was test flying this, that he's almost got an instinct in him, like when he gets to that level, he kind of braces for that switch over from low to high. Well, that's another thing that's just gone here, right? There is no low screw, high screw. It's again that solid throttle body that just turns smoothly, so there's no transition. That's gone.
Yeah, like I said, they've really optimized that RPM range to where that is completely gone on it. That's when you really feel the difference between the regular Moster with a chainsaw carb and the new EFI.
Let's talk about the dashboard a little bit, and we'll actually pull this piece out here. So this is actually going to ride on the swing arm. We can show you that here in a second. But this little dashboard is going to give you a lot of in-flight information. So this dashboard is actually going to sit right here. Of course, this is you can configure this to be on your paramotor where it's the most comfortable, but this is where it came from the factory. It's going to sit right there, and it's going to plug in, and it's going to give you a bunch of in-flight information. So the first thing that happens when you get in this paramotor is you have to tell this how much fuel is currently in your tank, and that's required. So you can't just strap this on your back and go fly. You have to tell it how much fuel's in the tank, because it's going to base all of its calculations based on that starting number. So the more accurate that you can be there, the better. You plug in, I currently have 5 liters, right? And we'll show you how to do that. You plug it in that you currently have your current level of fuel, strap it on your back, and go fly. While you're in flight, this thing is going to tell you
your cylinder head temperature, your exhaust gas temperature, so CHT and EGT, instantaneous fuel consumption. You can toggle back and forth between instantaneous and average fuel consumption. There is how much time you have left on your fuel tank. Yep.
In the upper left, you're going to have your current RPM. So whatever your engine RPM is at, and if you have a tachometer on your engine, it'll tell you what your remaining flight time is. So based on that initial input of I have 5 liters and my fuel burn is this, it knows exactly how much fuel you have left. And it knows based on that, based on your current patterns of flight, how much longer you can fly. So it's going to tell you land in 30 minutes, right? That's great information.
If you do a long full throttle run, like you're climbing up to altitude, something like that, when your cylinder head temperature gets to a certain level, but it'll start flashing that you're getting too hot. And if it goes over that certain level, what it'll do is start adding more fuel as you're running full throttle to help cool down your cylinder head temperature. So it does manage combustion temperature a bit as well.
That's a safety feature, and it's also it's a good maintenance feature, right? It's going to make the engine run cleaner, and it's going to, like when you pull that engine apart, crack that head for the 100-hour maintenance, 150-hour maintenance, it's just going to look nicer.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot less carbon buildup in there. One thing you got to remember with this is, being that it is premix, you're really going to have to be precise in how much you mix your fuel, because that injector there can change. If there's too much oil in the fuel, or there's too little oil in the fuel, it's going to change how that engine runs. So you want to be precise with, exactly which oil you're using in it and what your mixture is going to be at. So they're still using the Motul 710 and the Motul 800. That's what's been tested in this thing. So that's what you're going to want to go with, either the 50-to-1 or the 66-to-1. So the battery on it, it's a in-house custom battery. It's got a LiPo battery in it. There's a charging port here. There's a built-in 60 amp fuse. The battery lasts for 7 hours. It comes with its own charger, and the charge time from 0 to hero is 1 hour. So it charges pretty quickly. If you were at a fly-in for a day, you could probably fly it all day. You've got a whole 7 hours to use. Run it down, charge it up, throw it in the charger, or you can throw it in the charger in the afternoon, and you're going to be good by the evening flight session.
I think a cool test to run on this is to fill that fuel tank all the way up, charge that battery all the way up, and see which runs out first.
Yeah.
Right, because you're going to be able to fly for a lot longer with a full fuel tank. You could probably fly for 5-6 hours, like on a Moster, which is unheard of. And that battery is supposed to last for 6-7 hours. So let's see which one we can kill first. So guys, we're going to give you a lot of information today. There's going to be a lot of technical details that we're going to go over. We're going to talk back and forth about the new features of this engine. But please, if you have any comments or questions or anything you want to know about specifically, please leave a comment so that we can come back and address those. We're going to be talking about this engine a lot. We think it's super cool. It's going to be a lot of fun to fly. We can't wait to get out there and fly it some more.
Yeah, we'll be doing more videos on it. So yeah, definitely throw some questions in the comment section there, and we'll get them in the next video for you. This history in the making. Hometown legend from the basement. Feel the bass groove from the top down. Came to free the people on lockdown. Let me show you how I do this. No AC, we the coolest. Smell the roses
in the tulip, spin it like a hula, fill it all in your medulla.